A very good evening and welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar and we have a power-packed show lined up for you today. We're going to tackle a question which has been up in the air but needs to be looked at very seriously. Everyone is keen to be Atmanirbhar. The clarion call is to become less dependent on imports, including from China, where right now the context is a very different one. But yes, to become more self-dependent. The question is, what is the cost of it? We are going to look at whether Indian consumers are going to be okay with shelling out a higher price for Make in India products. That's the big story that we're tackling on the show this evening. We're also looking at some very interesting developments which are taking place around the world. The tourist hotspots want to open up their doors for visitors. Some are friendly, some not so friendly, and tourists will definitely have to pay a high price. You will also hear from market veteran Ramdev Agarwal later in the show. But let's begin and tell you what's triggered this off. So Union Minister Piyush Goyal, during an address today, outlined specifically how India would move towards becoming a manufacturing powerhouse. During the conversation that followed his presentation, Mr. Goyal also did go on to say that for some time at least, Indian consumers will have to support Indian manufacturing. That means we focus on quality as far as Indian manufacturing is concerned, but also be ready to pay more for it. Now, this is an important statement and a loaded one in the context of the narrative we are seeing in the country today. Today, a lot of dependence is on products which are made with Chinese inputs or come imported from China, and the biggest advantage of them is the price advantage. But before we delve into this deeper, let's listen in to what Piyush Goyal said today.
The spirit to promote Make in India, that if a particular product is 1 or 2%, little bit here and there, costlier than an imported product, probably even a little more than that costlier than an imported product, very often it's sensible to buy Indian, because in the short run, the large international companies can dump material at low prices, at very competitive prices. But in the long run, if Indian manufacturing doesn't survive or is not able to meet this competition, in the long run, we will have no options but to pay terrible prices for the same products.
As tensions rise at Indo-China border, the call for boycotting Chinese products becomes stronger than ever, and vocal for local is garnering immense support. The Prime Minister himself has repetitively called for self-reliance and promoting Make in India. But at a time when we are fighting a pandemic and are at loggerheads with a neighbor, how prepared are we to cut down on imports and be on our own?
India is open in almost every sector. We have some constraints on multi-brand retail, particularly because we have a large part of India dependent on the small corner store. In fact, the pandemic, it's the corner store, the mom and pop stores which have kept the essential supplies going in all our homes. So I do think they played a very important role. In fact, post-pandemic, the country recognizes their role even more.
The key to self-reliance lies in domestic manufacturing. The government has even identified priority sectors such as leather, footwear, furniture, etc. to promote small-scale industries and reduce import dependence. There are, however, several hurdles such as the availability of raw material, technology, skill set, and producing a world-class product at viable prices.
India has finally evolved and has made up its mind that we are going to only accept good quality products. And even within the country, we are making an effort to improve the quality standards of our MSMEs. I think business and government together can really bring back that quality culture into the country, can bring back that consciousness in our consumers that India also makes good quality products.
There is, however, a silver lining to this situation. India is looking to convert this crisis into opportunity by forging new partnerships and tapping potential export destinations.
So we have, in a sense, reached up to 88 to 90% of the level of exports that we had in June 2019 in the current month, in the first 2 weeks. I'm awaiting the third week results, which I shall get by tomorrow.
Self-reliance is not something that can be achieved overnight. Government's motto remains clear. There will be support but not subsidies. There won't be any handouts for businesses, but the focus will remain on building ecosystem to ensure sustainability in the longer run.
So the question is that everyone agrees on the fact that we need to become Atmanirbhar, that we need to find replacements or alternatives for the products and intermediary goods that we're dependent on China for. The question is, are we willing to pay the price for it? And that is really an important one, a key one. What is the cost of buying and using made in India, both in terms of quality and of price? Is it a fair ask from the average Indian consumer? These are key questions, and helping me talk about some of these points today are Nitin Kunkolienker, President of MAIT. Pleased to welcome Gautam Chikermane to the show, Vice President of ORF. And I'm speaking as well with Ashok Taneja, MD and CEO of Shriram, Pistons and Rings. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for speaking with us today. Gautam, I want to start with you and get your view on setting the stage for this conversation. It's absolutely noble, warranted, and required that we find ways to be less reliant on a neighbor who can really arm twist us for that kind of import dependence. But it will come at a cost. Are we at that right stage to ask Indians to pay more for made in India?
So I want to answer this question in three parts, Tamanna. First is, let's divide what we are buying. What is India buying from China? So the first part is critical infrastructure. Second part is handsets and other stuff. And third part is all these teddy bears and t-shirts, etc. When we come to critical infrastructure, the government should immediately ban 5G equipment, buying any 5G equipment from any Chinese company like Huawei or ZTE. For the 4G equipment that is already here, telecom companies must create an additional line of security to prevent consumer and business attacks. Here, perhaps a PPP between telcos and national security may be necessary. The problem with 5G equipment is that it's a complex technology, and there could be Chinese parts in a non-Chinese nationality equipment. And so we need to ensure that, let us say, if it's Ericsson or Samsung that provides this equipment, there is inadequate responsibility and accountability embedded into the contracts. Indigenization of 5G equipment has begun. You should see the first indigenized 5G coming up by March 2021 from IIT Madras. Let's see how that shapes out. The second part is power plants. I would say the same thing. No new plants from China, but existing plants you can continue until they end through the life cycle, although it's a long life cycle product. The second part is products like handsets. So don't expect consumers to change overnight.
Yeah.
There could be costs to be incurred. It's not just the price. Let's say if Chinese is 100 rupees and a non-Chinese is 125 rupees. I don't think the cost matters so much. I think there is a techno-nationalism happening in every household today. There is no constituency left in India that supports China. But I would propose the same model. Once your equipment, give it a year, give it
No, but is the price differential that much of 100 and 125? I know it was a very broad example you were giving me, but then what is the kind of price differential we're looking at? Let's say, for example, something like import of solar panels. If we increase tariffs and reduce our dependence on imports of solar panels from China, your costs of going solar, which are already pretty high, are only going to get bumped up.
So Tamanna, let me articulate this as an aggregate, as an economist. When we aggregate the aggregate price that the economy pays for goods from China, let us assume you talked about solar panels, for instance. So let us assume even a double cost. But at an aggregate, it won't be double. We will have 5%, 7%, 10% increase in prices when you take it as together. let's call it a China shock. We've sustained 2 oil shocks. We've sustained several other shocks, price shocks in the economy. This can be called a China shock. But there is no doubt, and the economy will have to pay for it. I mean, we have to, there is no way you can buy stuff from an enemy nation, for a nation that is so openly against India in every forum across the world and now on our borders. So I think the China story is over. And if there is a cost, which you can call as an inflation, let us say, for 1 year, there is a 5% percentage point increase in inflation. We'll have to deal with it.
Yeah, let's ask those who have skin in the game. Ashok Taneja, what is your take on this? Just give us an idea of what is going to be the cost to the end consumer if you replace what comes in from China. And I'm not saying this can happen overnight, this can happen today. Maybe it shouldn't as well. We have to take a more pragmatic approach, etc. But what is the cost differential? And do you think there is an appetite for this? Remember, we're talking about this in a situation where consumer sentiment and consumer spending capacity is already very, very dampened.
I think the real question is not about importing from China or importing from anywhere. The question of Atmanirbhar is about being able to produce cost competitive goods. And if you are cost competitive, you need not depend on imports, whether these are from China or any other country. If you're cost competitive, the world is your market. I see Atmanirbhar not as self-reliance in terms of stopping imports or hindering imports in any way, but it is all about becoming more cost competitive and being globally cost competitive. So, as far as auto components are concerned, we have demonstrated that out of a $57 billion industry, over 25% of our products are exported. All we need to do is more of this.
No, but Mr. Taneja, I want to be very specific. I understand what you're saying about Atmanirbhar, but we cannot sort of split it and look at Atmanirbhar without the context of what is happening with China right now. And that is the very specific question. It comes from a statement that Union Minister Piyush Goyal made today in a different context. He didn't say the word China, but while laying out a manufacturing plan and a manufacturing strengthening plan for India, when he was asked a question, he did very specifically say that for some time, Indians may have to pay more for India-made goods. My question is, how much more, and is that appetite there?
We should let that decision be taken by the government. As industry, what we can do is to make sure that we can manufacture what we are currently importing, and we can not only manufacture to substitute imports, but to export. I think the decision of dealing with countries is best left to the country and to the government. And whatever the government decides, the industry will follow.
No, clearly, whatever the government decides, the industry will follow. That's. Let me come back to you on specifically what I'm talking about. Meanwhile, Mr. Nitin, your point of view, how do you become a manufacturing hub, and is that really the right approach? Gautam Chikermane was very clear when he said a few minutes ago that the China story is over, and that's an important statement because for the last few years, our approach has been to get Chinese companies to invest in manufacturing capacities and capabilities in India. So it is Chinese money coming in, but you're making in India. Those terms may change.
Tamanna, let's not be very emotional. Let's be very rational as well. In India, high value addition is high cost, and it's a very substantial high cost if you try to build a value chain. Auto industry had a very unique example because there was a protection of tariffs, which really helped them a lot. Whereas Indian government signed, for example, I represent IT sector or electronics, is signed up so many FTAs and especially ITA 1 agreement that virtually killed the domestic manufacturing setups, which we were very strong till 2000. So somewhere the substitution process, and as Mr. Taneja just mentioned, we should have moved from an import substitution policies to an export-led growth, which the government has started realizing now, and they have created policies towards it now, just a couple of months back. This should have happened 10 to 15 years back. Indian system created import very cheap. I mean, there was inverted duty regime, which made imports cheaper than the locally manufactured products. The whole set of policies were wrong. I mean, we can discuss in detail some other time, but there were issues. Today, if we want to export, we need a scale. I mean, you can't just produce for export market. We need to club the local demand with the export scale. And
but Mr. Nitin, my argument here is that export is phase 2. Export is phase 2. Today the concern is, and there's a reason why I have chosen people who represent two specific sectors, your auto ancillaries and your electronics, because these are some of the very high components or very high proportions of imports from China. So today, if you have to find a replacement theory, the fact is that those products which are completely made in India do not exist, or they are not competitive enough technology-wise and price-wise. So what do you do to change that?
Tamanna, we can't just talk about China in isolation. Today, with the kind of bilateral and multilateral treaties that we have signed, we may put tariffs, we might put restrictions on Chinese goods, or we may try to find a substitute. But the goods are coming via other regions. I mean, there are in RCEP, China was strongly pushing for an accumulation clause. What does that mean? That means they have a presence in other markets. Other friendly markets like Thailand and Malaysia are being in their control. So it's not that only you will get from China, the stuff is also getting routed from these countries. We need to look at, see, every FTA that India has signed, India lost the export market also. So we need to reassess India's gain in these FTAs, whether it is bilateral or multilateral, in contact.
No, that's a different question, whether that's actually what we should be doing. And I think you make a good point there, Mr. Nitin, that the Chinese presence in the global market is huge, and for India to suddenly say that I will not touch anything that is Chinese may not be the right answer or the right direction. Gautam, you agree with
that? Like I was saying, so there is a hierarchy of things: critical infrastructure, big goods, and small goods. Now, among the small goods, for instance, diyas in Diwali or those lights, do we really need Chinese stuff? That is very easily changed. Telephones may be a little difficult, and critical infrastructure even more so. Can I just answer one of Mr. Taneja's points that he made, that let the government deal with China? I agree. The government can deal with China. But while dealing with China, sir, if the government does not introspect and fix the laws, compliances that India has in its own backyard, then fine. So we will stop buying Chinese stuff, but we will not be able to grow. To give you, can I just throw some statistics, Tamanna? At an aggregate, and Mr. Taneja would be knowing this far better than I do, at an aggregate level, there are 1,536 laws that the Indian business has to function within. There are more than 69,000 compliances at an aggregate. I'm not saying every business has to do it. At an aggregate, 69,000 compliances that companies have to follow. There are 6,618 filings that companies needs to do. Mr. Taneja would know every board meeting in every quarter. You would be discussing this with your company secretary and the other board members. Are we compliant or not? This would be today, I think, India's biggest board meeting chunk. Now, these compliances rules, they change at the rate of 3,000 a year. Every year, there are 3,000 changes. Is this the kind of regulatory infrastructure that any businessman would like to function within? So I think while saying Atmanirbhar Bharat, let's also strengthen Bharat. And I think
clearly. Things like cost of power and electricity, things like cost of labor, things like cost of permissions and bureaucracy that you've mentioned. all of those add up and make you less competitive.
So they all have to be fixed along.
But my question is, then,
no
is that cost of Atmanirbharta, is it fair to then pass it on to the last consumer, who's just about, the Indian consumer has just about got a taste of world-class products and services, just about.
No, so I agree with that point, and I think there will have to be a short-term sacrifice to be made. But I don't think only fixing the prevention of China needs to be done. I think Atmanirbhar Bharat also means fixing the country from inside.
Yeah.
And without fixing it from inside, you will not be able, as Mr. Taneja says, we will be more competitive, etc. We cannot. We are fighting with the Indian industry is fighting with their hands tied behind them. Which country in the world, tell me, has 8,600 criminal clauses in business laws? Tell me. Name one country. There isn't. They have all made those laws. We have inherited them blindly. We have copy-pasted them some random manner in which we draft these legislations. And we are burdening our industry with all these kinds of needless compliances. I think it's time to rethink the introspective part as much as we want non-China products in our markets.
Mr. Taneja, you want to come in on that point?
There is no doubt if you make it easier to do business, if you have less regulation, if you have simpler laws, if there is more trust in the wealth creators, it will enable us to become more competitive. I don't think we have to look at only China or imports from China for that. The government has taken many steps to make life easier. Many more need to be taken. There is no doubt also the fact that despite all these challenges, there are industries that have become globally competitive. Today, the two-wheeler industry in India is globally competitive. We have beaten China at that game. If you look at small car manufacturing, we can produce a car at a price which no other country in the world can. We need to create more stories like this. Number one, this has to be done by the industry. Number two, this has to be done, supported by the government. Surely, we all know cost of capital in India is higher than in the rest of the world. Typically, we borrow between 9 to 12%. Globally, this is between 1 to 4%. We know that cost of power in the country is higher than what is available in the rest of the world. We know cost of logistics is higher. Some of these things can be fixed and need to be fixed. And once we do that, we will not only be more competitive to serve the domestic market, we will be more competitive to serve the global markets. So really, we have to do the fixing, not by looking at China and import subsidies.
But Mr. Taneja, then let me come back to the key question that I think you weren't very comfortable answering earlier. And that's the point. In the interim, till we fix all of this, and this is a big ask because we're talking about dismantling decades of ingrained style of doing business in our country. And we're saying change everything. It's going to take time. In the interim, do you think that consumers should be asked to pay more for made in India products to give them a boost and a fillip?
I have two observations regarding that. Number one, consumers don't always buy the lowest cost product or the lowest price product. There is a market at every level, every price level. And so cost is not the only factor that determines it. There are many other factors: quality, after sales service, brand value, and all these things. Second, when you want to develop an industry like the auto industry, like the auto component industry, like the electronics industry, to provide protection to an industry like this for some period of time, for a long-term gain is desirable. For that, if the consumer pays a slightly higher price, so be it. The consumer will pay a much higher price if you did not develop these industry within the country. How did the auto component industry become what it has become? The government had a phased manufacturing program for automobile manufacturers, which mandated that certain portion of the vehicle, certain value of the vehicle must be procured within the country. This is what initiated the self-sufficiency in the auto component.
But let me argue this the other way, and I just want to include everyone in this. So Nitin, please do come in on this. If you have a protectionist policy beyond a point, you may protect your industry in the short term, but you are also pushing them to be permanently uncompetitive. And then you tell the same players go out and export and compete with the world. Well, China's going to be there, as is Bangladesh, as is Vietnam, as is South Korea.
I am totally against protectionist policies, and let's be very frank, if we are to grow, we have to expand our markets and we have to become competitive. That's possible only through an export-led strategy. We need to start looking at consuming markets. We need to produce at scale, and there is a potential. India has a scale, ability to gear up at a scale. But unfortunately, see, the policy of protection has to be replaced with the policy of promotion. We need to promote. The unfortunate part in India is the ease of doing business. What government of India talks about is the central level policies. Nothing is happening at the state level or a tier 3 level. There is a disconnect. The federal structure of the country is causing us a problem. Today, government of India has taken some steps, some incentives, some policies. There is no integration. For example, in electronics, most of the state policies, if you map, there is a huge disconnect with what government of India is talking about. You look at the Commerce Ministry, Industries Ministry, government of India has released a policy, industrial manufacturing policy somewhere. It was a draft stage. Just show me a single state policy which is aligned with that, which talks about next generation manufacturing. If this kind of disconnect exists, what do you do? I mean, we can't say being protectionist and you give us a tariff cover and you signed so many FTAs. How do you get a tariff cover? You don't get a tariff cover. So, for example, IT, you don't get it. Today, we are one of the second highest importers. Almost $90 billion imports we have almost touched last year. Hardly anything is manufactured. So where do you go? So we need to talk about the improvement in this, the gaps between, there is a disconnect between the state and center. There is a disconnect between central government owned agencies, between one ministry, two departments are conflicting. Somewhere we need to fix this. And today, most of the states are not land power. There is no guarantee that you will get land and power immediately when you start your unit. What do you talk about ease of doing business? It is just like going 2 steps forward and 3 steps backward. See, as Mr. Gautam has just talked about the 3,000 amendments that take place. So every year, more legislations come. There is a red tapeism.
There is a plan. There is a plan. We're told that states are, falling over each other to attract investment and ease the situation. So what is happening with all that? Yes, Gautam, you want to come?
I just come in on the state part. So I'd just like to give some hope and also agree with Nitinji on this. So yes, states are lagging. But if you look at the case of Madhya Pradesh, which last month came up with certain reforms, they have gone in for process reforms. For instance, if you get a license, it will be for 10 years and it will not need to be renewed every year. Instead of 63 registers, there will be 1 register. Instead of 13, from 13, I think filings, they have gone 13 filings. Yeah, they have gone to 1. So I don't recall the last part. So there is a whole lot of process reforms that Madhya Pradesh has gone in for, keeping China in mind, keeping the fact that companies are leaving China and wishing to come to, they are largely going to Vietnam, so to attract them to Madhya Pradesh. So Madhya Pradesh is an example that sort of contradicts Mr. Nitin's thesis. On the other hand, Uttar Pradesh completely goes with what Mr. Nitin is saying. They went about they had the same objective, which is to call investments, but they went about it in a very strange manner. They said no labor laws for 3 years, no safety provisions for 3 years.
But they had to walk back. They had to walk it back.
Exactly. I wrote that they will have to take a U-turn. When Allahabad High Court questioned them, sent a notice, they had to take a U-turn back. So I think different states are trying different things. Finally, if you look at agricultural reforms, Karnataka, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh have all worked together to give greater freedom to farmers. Now there is potential for more supply chains to come there. Essential Commodities Act that has been amended at the union level has now been enforced in these states. So I think there are small green shoots of changes that are already happening. For the moment, they are happening in BJP governed states. But I hope through a demonstration effect, through farmer prosperity or more investments going into Madhya Pradesh, for instance, other states may follow.
All right.
Gautam,
I mean, I don't want to get into the political angle, Gautam, so you have laid the bait there. But, we'll have to wait and see how the states function. I just want to add one point to the states conversation and the federal structure, which Nitin referred to. That the democratic structure of India on the face of it may seem like it's slowing us down sometimes, but it's our greatest strength. It's our greatest strength, and it's with all of the red tape that it comes wrapped in. This is what really distinguishes us from any country which doesn't have free and fair elections and can, tell its politicians their message when they go wrong. I'm going to have to end it here. But I want to thank all of you for that conversation and just leave you with this thought that if the quality is right, if the price is right, then I think the Made in India label can shine like any other. Thank you so much for joining us on the first
Thank you, Gautam ji. Thank you, Taneja ji.
Thank you.
We'll take a very short break at this point. When we come back, do you know that tourist hotspots have opened its doors, welcoming visitors? But where are the tourists? All of that when we return.